Hi, hello. Today, for this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to make a simple bodice sloper pattern for this bodice entirely out of newspaper. This can be used with fabric, and this process can be done with fabric, but we're going to use newspaper today. So this is going to be the ultimate result. Today, we're going to get to this point where we have a single-sided pattern for the back and the front ready to be taken off of the dress form and trued to make the final pattern there, the final bodice there. And we have a client today. If you are going to be working with a live client, then you'll need to have your client wear a tight fitting knit garment on the top so that you can pin your newspaper without any damage to your client and get a good fit because the top is nice and tight. For tools today, you're going to need pins and newspaper and a pair of scissors and a marker. So here we have our tools and our newspaper. I really like newspaper magazines because they're ready to go for size, but any newspaper will do as long as it's a little bit longer than the torso of your client. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a long side. This is just a single sheet of newspaper. And we're going to take a long side and fold it parallel to the long side. We're going to do that with 2 sheets of newspaper. Or you can do this with 2 halves of a big sheet of newspaper. So first step, try and make that parallel to the edge and crease it sharply. That will be our center line. Then you want to cut a starter neckline. And this does not have to be exact in any way. It's just going to let it to the fitting process to start. So this is going to be my front. And then to make it fit in the back, we will need the center line in the back to be matching, right? So that would be the back. So we're going to make the back neckline similar. I usually make it a little bit shallower for the back. Okay, so now we are ready to start our process. And I'm going to start with the front bodice. So I have my folded edge. That's going to become my center seam. And that is going to go right down the middle front of our client, also known as the center seam or center front. I'm going to take a pin, and we do not want to stab our clients. So we're going to be very careful to keep our fingers as much as possible between our clients and the pins and pin across. If you're working on a dress form, of course, you don't need to be nearly so cautious. So we print center front, and then we're going to pull this down straight to the natural waist, which is the narrowest part of the body, right where the rib cage meets the hips. And we're going to pin at that point as well. Then we're going to pin at the center bust front along the bust line. That's the widest part of the breasts around the torso. And pin right there. Now, we're going to pin at the neck here. I might have cut that neck hole a little bit wide, but we're just going to pin right at the shoulder seam and the neck. And then, let me turn this a little bit so you can see. I'm going to smooth from across the front of the chest up to the shoulder point. And the shoulder point is right where your collarbone hits your shoulder. And then I'm going to put a pin in there. So you can see here that the shoulder is pinned with 2 pins and that it's very smooth across the front. This is where the scissors come into play. You need to cut. I'm going to move ask my client to move her arm back a little bit, and then I'm going to cut a rough armhole. This is not going to be the final armhole. This is just to give us enough ease so that we can continue the process. And we'll probably need to put a couple of slashes here and there. I'm just going to put a couple little relief cuts so that when I do the next step, the newspaper doesn't bunch up. Cutting slashes helps the process to be more smooth. All right, so now I am going to take another pin and smooth from the shoulder point down under the arm to get a nice smooth effect. Now, if I'm getting bunching and gathering like that, that lets me know that I need to slash a little deeper to relieve tension. I might even put another one there. Yeah, and you can see as I'm cutting those little slashes, it's letting the newspaper wrap around the chest in a smoother way. Doing this with fabric, it would lay a little smoother, but we're using newspaper. So now I'm going to pin under the armpit, right at the side seam. This would be where I think a good armhole opening would be. All right, pin there. And now I'm going to go ahead and smooth down the side seam. I know this is baggy up front. We're going to address that next. We're going to smooth down the side seam. Now, when I do that, I'm going to notice that I'm getting some tension here also. So before I put my pin in there, I'm going to trim a little bit away from the bottom, and you don't have to even cut it off. And then I'm going to cut a few little slashes up towards the natural waist. And that should let this smooth down to the natural waist. This is the same line where you pinned the center front at the waist. And this should be vertical or perpendicular to the floor. Do try not to stab your client. Try and be careful to keep the pin away from the skin and only through the shirt. Then we have smooth effect here and on the side, and a bagginess right here. That's ease, and we're going to take that out by adding a dart. Before we do that, we are going to do a little more trimming. I'm going to keep my trimming about 1.5 inches or so, 2 inches below my pins. And then I'm going to slash a few little slashes up towards what's going to become the waistline, but not cut all the way up there. Depending on how curvy a waist your client has, this can really buckle as it tries to accommodate the flare of the hips. So we really want to make that not happen. So all of this ease, we are going to turn that into a dart, a bust dart. And generally you want the dart to come from the bust point and where the nipple would be on the breast, and usually about 2.5 inches away from the center seam. Now, of course, this is very individual depending on what size your client is. So do it by eye. It should look, may have a nice taper from the bust point towards the belly button, not too extreme. And you're going to smooth from both sides until you have a smooth gather. And then I like to fold towards the center seam, but it really doesn't matter. You can fold towards the center seam or you can fold towards the back. Either is fine. There. There. I'm going to fold towards the side. And then you are going to, at the waist, but remember, don't forget, you do not want to stab your client, so try and get your fingers under there. At the waist, you're going to put a pin. Always you pin across darts, like that. And you want to put in 3 pins for the dart. By the way, you want to make sure that you are not pinning to the shirt or dress form for a dart. You always want to pin only to the fabric, which also, of course, is safer for your client. There you go. So I should be able to put my fingers under there and it's not attached. So that is all pinned and gathered. That is finished. Now we're going to mark it using our big green marker. You can do this with tailor's chalk if you're concerned about bleeding through the muslin or newspaper. The first thing you want to do is mark the pins that you put in. All the pins that you put in should be marked. And if you want to use a different color marker for this, you can, right? Use two colors so that it's really clear what you're doing. So that's that. Then I'm going to mark the waistline. And this line should be parallel to the floor. I'm going to draw down the dart, and I'm going to mark it both on the folded side that I can see there, and I'm going to mark it on the bodice there. Then I'm going to make a nicer neckline, something that looks comfortable for my client. And then I'm going to draw a shoulder seam, matching up those two pins. And I'm going to draw an armhole also, which looks comfortable for my client. And then a vertical line for the side seam. So here, on the side, let me make that a little bit darker so it's a little easier to see. I have marked a curved armhole, a shoulder seam, a neckline, the dart, and the center. The next step, we're going to work from the back. And we're going to use our second sheet of newspaper that we prepared. And the process is very similar. It has two darts instead of one, but otherwise it's very similar. So let me grab my pin cushion off the back here. I'm going to set my pin cushion here. It's just a piece of fabric with some fiber fill inside of it, and it's a good idea to have a pin cushion. And I'm going to find my client's center back. So this should go right at that little knob of spine at the back of your neck. Then that very first step is to pin that. Then we're going to take a second pin, and we're going to pin at the center back waist. Just like this. Then we're going to pin at the center back. And this is at the space right between those shoulder blades. Be careful not to stab your client, of course. And we're going to wrap that around over the shoulder, just the way we did in the front. Now I might want to, while I'm at it, tuck my shoulder seam in from my front. Just fold it on the green line that I drew, just because it makes it a little bit easier to see what I'm doing. And then I'll just pin this back into place at the neck. It's a little hard to see. I've just folded the corner, the front seam in there, so it's a nicer edge. It makes it easier for me to see what I'm doing. Then I'm going to smooth around from the back up to the neck. I'll put a pin in here. the shoulder seam. And then I'll put a second pin in at the shoulder point, right where the collarbone touches the shoulder. And then I'm going to cut, I'm going to move my client's arm a little bit here so that that's what I'm doing. And then I'm going to cut that placeholder armhole again. Right. So right here, starting a little bit about an inch away from the shoulder pin, I'm just going to cut a little relief here. A little bit more than that. This can get messy, so make sure you're keeping your scraps in one place so they're easy to get rid of later. Then I'm going to maybe cut a couple of little reliefs here and there. And then I'm going to go ahead and smooth down. Arm up a little bit there. It's nice to have a patient client who is willing to work with you. So I'm noticing that there's a lot of tension in that. There are a lot of wrinkles. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut a few more slashes to make this a little bit more ease. And because I can see that this is in fact going to go quite a bit around, I'm going to go ahead and just cut this side off. Yeah. And that should make it fit a little bit more easily. So I'm going to smooth down from the shoulder point under the armpit, and it's pretty good. It's going to always gap a little here. We always have a little ease there because of the slope of the shoulder. So we're going to pin this temporarily, and then we're going to unpin the shoulder there. And you'll notice I have a lot of bag here, so while I'm at it, I think I'll cut a couple slashes. Tension in the fabric can really mess up your fit. So if you see that happening, you can see how that relaxed almost right away. When you see tension in the material you're working with, put a few slashes in to release it, let it go. Okay. So now we need to put a shoulder dart in. Pull this a little bit closer so that you can see what I'm doing. So I've taken the pin out of the shoulder point, and I'm going to take the pin out of the neck as well, just to make sure that I don't have any tension. And I'm going to smooth back to the top here, to the neck, shoulder, neck junction. And I'm going to put my pin back in there. And then I'm going to gather that ease in. You see there's bag here. We don't like that. We want to have a really beautiful, smooth curve around the back to the shoulder. So we're going to pinch out that extra ease. Now this will not be a big dart. This is going to be a much smaller than the dart than the one we want on the front, but it's still an important one. It allows the stiff, flat material to curve around the body. So what I'm doing is I'm gathering, let me pull this a little closer so you can see what I'm doing. I have a little raised ridge of newspaper that I'm folding over. So you can see that I went from that looseness, I gathered up the extra newspaper, and you can just sort of pinch it into a ridge, the dart, and then fold it over to allow that newspaper to really have a smooth curve over the shoulder. And then we're going to pin across the dart. Remember, you always pin darts to themselves. You don't pin them to your dress form or your fitting shirt, your fitting garment. And that is actually, there we go. And one pin is probably enough, but you can put a second one in there if you want to, right here. Make sure you're not stabbing your client by getting your fingers under there. You don't have to stab yourself either. There you go. And there your darts are. And then usually I need to unpin and repin the side here. Usually need to repin and unpin the side here a little bit just to make sure that you haven't introduced any tension. So it's always good practice just to make sure that you didn't introduce any tension. And I do see that this is a little bigger than it needs to be, so I think I'm going to cut that again to relieve tension in the material. Yeah. Okay, then we'll pin this back at the top of the side seam. And we're ready for the waist. So just like we did in the front, we'll go ahead and take off some of that extra material, a couple, inch and a half, 2 inches from the waist pins. And I'm going to slash vertically to relieve that wrinkle that I'm seeing. That's much better. There we go. And now we're ready to do the side seam. So I'm going to smooth straight down from the top pin, put in a pin at the side waist, side seam waist, so that it matches up with what's on the front. Now I have my ease, just like I did in the front. It will be less pronounced because the back isn't nearly as curvy as the front on a female dress form or on a female client. But it is still present, so you can see I'm finding that ease, that extra bagginess, and I'm smoothing it together to make that ridge. And I'm going to fold this towards the side seam since that's what I did in the front. You'll notice that this dart is quite long because the curve of the back is longer than the curve of the front from the waist up, but it's much thinner. We're going to pin at the waist across the dart. Darts always get pinned to themselves and not to the dress form or to the fitting shirt. And you want to put in at least 2 darts, two sets of pins here. That. Nope, I did manage to get a little bit of fabric there. I want to make sure I don't have any fabric pins there. All right, and then that's the pinning for this. And now I'm going to use my big green marker to mark it. I'm going to refer to what's on the front as I work. So there's the center back pin around the neck to the shoulder neck, and then from the shoulder neck across to the shoulder point, which should mirror the seam that's already there, and you can feel it. Then I'm going to continue the seam from the front, the armhole from the front. And again, you want it to be something that you think is going to be comfortable for your client to wear and which matches up with what's on the front. There you go. That matches up pretty well. And then down the side seam. And again, this should match pretty well with the front. And then the waist. Mark the center back. And you can even make a line across parallel to the floor just for reference. And then there is the waist and the dart. Make sure you indicate both the dart fold and where it lays on the material. And that is all marked and ready to be taken off the dress form and trued and used to make a bodice. that is the whole process. Right. Next time, we will take this off the dress form and turn it into a trued pattern.